The young Apache woman slipped almost naked into the rancher's bed, and her words changed his fate. The wind howled across the vast plains, carrying with it the scent of rain and earth. Lightning split the sky in jagged lines, illuminating the rugged landscape for brief moments before plunging it back into shadow. At the heart of this untamed land stood the ranch, a lone fortress of wood and stone, its walls weathered by years of storms and isolation. The rancher, a man of broad shoulders and weathered hands, moved silently through the house, listening to the echoes of the storm outside. He had lived here for most of his life, alone, with nothing but memories and regrets for company. He was a man of few words, and those who knew him spoke of him in whispers. Some said he was cursed, bound by a shadow he could not escape. Others claimed he had been touched by tragedy too many times for one life to bear. Whatever the truth, the rancher carried himself with a quiet intensity that drew respect and fear alike. Tonight, however, his solitude would be broken in a way he could never have anticipated. The storm had grown fiercer. Rain lashed against the windows, and the wind rattled the shutters with relentless force. Somewhere in the darkness, a figure moved. She was young, a woman with hair as dark as the night and eyes that shone with a strange light. Her footsteps were careful but hurried, carrying her closer to the ranch with each passing second. The young Apache woman had been traveling for days, guided by instinct and something she could not name. She had heard of the rancher, of his strength and of the shadow that followed him, and she knew, somehow, that he held a key to what she sought. By the time she reached the door, she was drenched, her cloak clinging to her like a second skin. Her fingers trembled as she knocked, but no answer came. The wind tore at her hair, and a flash of lightning revealed her face to the rancher, who had finally noticed the sound at the door. He approached cautiously, eyes narrowing as he peered into the storm. For a moment he could barely believe what he saw, a woman, soaked and fragile, standing in the rain, yet her posture was defiant, almost otherworldly. Without a word, she pushed the door open. The rancher stepped back, startled by her boldness, but she did not hesitate. She moved past him into the warmth of the house, leaving a trail of wet footprints across the wooden floor. He wanted to stop her, to demand answers, but something in her gaze held him in place. It was a look of determination, of purpose, as though she belonged to some world he could not see. "I need shelter," she said softly, her voice barely rising above the storm. "Please, I cannot stay out there." The rancher studied her for a long moment. He had lived alone for years, trusting no one, keeping his heart locked away like a treasure in a forgotten cave. Yet in that instant, something inside him shifted. Perhaps it was pity, perhaps curiosity, or perhaps the faintest whisper of destiny. He stepped aside, motioning toward a chair near the hearth. "You can stay," he said, his voice low and steady, "but only until the storm passes." The young woman nodded, a faint smile touching her lips. She had expected resistance, and she had expected danger. What she did not expect was the warmth of the fire and the quiet strength in the man before her. As she settled into the chair, she removed her wet cloak, letting it fall to the floor. The rancher's gaze lingered for a moment, but it was not desire he felt. It was curiosity and something deeper, an understanding that she was not just another traveler seeking shelter. She spoke again, her words deliberate, carrying a weight beyond her years. "You are not like the others," she said. "I can see it in you. The shadow that follows, the burden you carry, it is heavy." The rancher stiffened. No one had ever spoken to him like that. Most people either feared him or pitied him, but this woman, she saw him. She looked past the rough exterior, past the scars and the silence, and spoke directly to the heart of who he was. "What do you know of shadows?" he asked, his tone guarded. "Enough," she replied. "Enough to know that running from them only makes them stronger. And enough to know that you can change your fate if you are willing to listen." Her words stirred something long buried within him, a memory of hope, of dreams he had buried under the weight of guilt and loneliness. He did not respond immediately, but he did not walk away either. Instead, he poured 2 cups of tea, the steam curling upward like spirits in the firelight, and handed one to her. They sat in silence, listening to the storm outside. The wind tore at the walls, rattling the windows and sending shivers through the room, but inside, the quiet between them was a fragile sanctuary. The young woman sipped her tea, her eyes never leaving his face, as if searching for the truth behind the stoic mask he wore. "You fear what you cannot control," she said, breaking the silence. "But fear does not define you. You can rise above it. You can become more than what the world has made you." The rancher's hands tightened around his cup. He had lived his life in solitude, believing that no one could understand the darkness he carried. Yet here was a woman who spoke with certainty, whose words cut through the layers of stone he had wrapped around his heart. "Why are you here?" he asked finally, his voice softer now. "Why do you care?" She set her cup down, leaning forward slightly. "Because our paths are connected. The choices you make, the courage you find, it affects more than just you. And because," she paused, her voice dropping to a whisper, "I have seen the way you can change if only you allow it." A flash of lightning illuminated her face, revealing eyes that seemed too old for her youthful features, eyes that had seen much, yet held hope. The rancher felt a shiver run through him, not from fear but from recognition. It was as if she had touched a part of him that no one else ever had, a part he thought was lost forever. The storm began to abate, the rain falling in softer sheets, the wind less violent. Yet despite the fading tempest outside, the storm within the rancher's heart had only begun. He realized with an unsettling clarity that this woman was unlike anyone he had ever met. She had stepped into his world without permission, yet she carried with her a power he could not name, a power to awaken, to challenge, to transform. Hours passed, and the night deepened. The fire burned low, casting long shadows across the room. The young woman remained quiet, her gaze distant, as if listening to secrets that only the wind and the stars could share. The rancher, unable to sleep, watched her with a mixture of awe and apprehension. He wanted to ask questions, to know where she came from, who she truly was, but the words caught in his throat. Finally, she spoke again, her voice barely more than a breath. "Your fate is not set," she said. "There is a choice before you. One path leads to darkness, alone and unfulfilled. The other leads to light, but it requires courage. Courage you have forgotten you possess." The rancher felt a tightening in his chest. He had spent so long believing that he was powerless, that his life was determined by shadows beyond his control. Yet her words struck a chord, igniting a spark he had long tried to extinguish. Before he could respond, she rose, moving toward the door. "I must leave," she said. "The storm has passed, but my path continues. Remember what I have said. Remember that change is always possible if you dare to reach for it." He wanted to stop her, to demand that she stay, to beg her to explain everything. But he knew, deep down, that she could not be held. Some truths must be discovered, not forced. She slipped out into the night, leaving him alone once more. The rain had slowed to a gentle drizzle, the first light of dawn beginning to touch the horizon. Yet the room felt charged, alive with the energy of her presence. The rancher stood by the window, watching the empty path where she had gone, feeling the weight of her words settle over him like a cloak. "The fate you fear is not yours to bear unless you awaken it." He whispered the words to himself, tasting their truth. For the first time in years, he felt a stirring of hope, mingled with fear. He did not yet understand what she meant, nor did he know the journey that awaited him. But one thing was certain, his life would never be the same. As the sun rose, casting golden light over the plains, the rancher made a silent vow. He would seek the courage she spoke of. He would face the shadows he had hidden from for so long. And perhaps, someday, he would find the answers that had eluded him his entire life. The young Apache woman's footsteps had vanished into the distance, but the echo of her presence lingered, a promise of change, and a challenge to a man who had thought himself untouchable. The wind carried her words across the plains, and somewhere deep within the rancher's heart, a fire began to burn, a fire that would not be easily extinguished. The storm had passed, but a greater tempest was rising, one that would test the limits of courage, heart, and destiny itself. And the rancher knew, with an unshakable certainty, that when the next shadow fell, he would be ready to face it. The morning sun rose slowly over the vast plains, painting the ranch in shades of gold and amber. The wind that had been fierce the night before was now gentle, carrying the soft scent of wet earth and distant pine. The rancher stood at the edge of his porch, hands resting on the railing, staring across the open land. The storm had passed, but the words of the young Apache woman echoed in his mind like a song he could not forget. The fate you fear is not yours to bear unless you awaken it. He did not fully understand what she meant. How could a single stranger arriving in the night unravel the layers of solitude he had spent decades building? Yet, he could not deny the weight of her words. They carried a certainty, a truth that seemed both ancient and urgent. Inside the house, the fire still smoldered, casting flickering shadows across the room. The rancher moved through it with a careful rhythm, his mind unsettled. Every object, the worn furniture, the old photographs, the tools of his trade, felt suddenly different, as if the storm had awakened something unseen. He ran his fingers along the table and paused at a small, carved box he had never opened. It had belonged to his father, a man whose presence lingered like a whisper in every corner of the ranch. For the first time, the rancher allowed himself to think of the past. Memories came unbidden, nights of cold, endless fields stretching into darkness, voices long silenced. But there was one memory that returned sharper than the rest, one that had been buried beneath years of denial. It was of his mother, a woman of quiet strength, who had once spoken to him of shadows and curses, of destinies shaped by courage and choices. He had dismissed her words then, as a child dismisses tales of spirits and ancient powers. But now, in the light of the young woman's presence, her words still fresh in his mind, he wondered if she had been right. Perhaps the darkness he carried was not just sorrow or guilt, but something older, something that reached across generations. Outside, the wind shifted, stirring the tall grass and whispering across the plains. The rancher's gaze was drawn to the horizon, to the hills that rose like ancient guardians against the sky. He felt a sudden pull, a sense that he needed to move, to act, to seek answers. The young Apache woman had given him more than shelter. She had given him a challenge, a spark that demanded recognition. He mounted his horse, a large black stallion with eyes as dark as the storm clouds that still lingered in memory. The plain stretched before him, empty and wild, yet alive with possibility. He rode toward the hills, guided by instinct and the faint memory of her presence. With each step, he felt the weight of years pressing against him, yet the thrill of something unseen pulled him forward. It was near the edge of a narrow canyon that he first noticed the signs, symbols etched into the stone, weathered by wind and rain, but unmistakable. They were marks of warning, messages left by those who had walked these lands long before him. As he dismounted, he traced the symbols with a finger, feeling an energy hum beneath the surface. The air was thick with silence, yet alive with whispers, as if the canyon itself remembered. "Courage is not the absence of fear," he heard, a voice faint yet clear, like the echo of the young woman's own words. "It is the willingness to face what you have denied." The rancher's pulse quickened. He had always believed that the world outside his ranch held only hardship and danger. Yet now, standing among the ancient stones, he felt that danger could be a teacher, that the shadows he had fled might hold keys to something greater. He realized with an almost painful clarity that he could no longer avoid the truths of his lineage. As he moved deeper into the canyon, the temperature seemed to drop. Mist rose from the ground, curling around his boots like living smoke. Shapes moved within the fog, fleeting and indistinct, but he did not flinch. He had faced storms before, yet this felt different. This was not a storm of wind or rain. It was a storm of the soul, a confrontation with the shadows he had carried in silence. It was then that he saw her, the young Apache woman standing on a rocky ledge above him. She was calm, her presence serene yet commanding, as if she had been waiting for him to arrive. The rain had dried from her cloak and the sun caught her hair, making it shine with an almost ethereal glow. "You came," she said simply, her voice carrying across the mist. "I knew you would." He frowned, startled that she had appeared so suddenly, yet a part of him was not surprised. I did not know why," he admitted. "I only felt that I had to come. Something called me." "That is the first step," she said, moving closer. "To face the shadows, you must first acknowledge them. Your family's history, your fears, your regrets, they are not just burdens. They are the roots of who you are, and they can be the roots of your salvation if you are willing to see them." The rancher swallowed hard. He had spent his life believing that strength came from solitude, that power came from control. Yet her words challenged everything he thought he knew. They hinted at a destiny beyond the plains, a path he had never dared to walk. "Why me?" he asked, his voice low. "Why now?" The young woman tilted her head, eyes piercing his. "Because the darkness is near its peak. Because the choice you make now will shape more than your own life. And because you have the courage, though you may not believe it, to change it." For a moment, silence fell. The canyon seemed to hold its breath, waiting for him to decide. Then, without warning, a wind swept through, carrying with it the sound of voices. Voices from the past, warning, pleading, accusing. The rancher felt the weight of generations upon him, the sins and regrets of those who had come before. He realized with a jolt that the curse he had long feared was not an idle tale. It was real. The young woman stepped closer, placing a hand lightly on his arm. Her touch was steady, grounding, and yet it carried a power he could not name. "You do not have to face it alone," she said, "but you must face it or it will consume you." He nodded, a mixture of fear and determination rising within him. The shadows of the past would not vanish without confrontation, and he understood now that avoidance was no longer an option. She led him deeper into the canyon, her movements confident and precise. Along the way, she spoke of the land, of its spirits, of the hidden forces that watched over the plains. Her words were like threads, weaving a tapestry of history and magic that stretched across time. The rancher listened, absorbing each word, feeling the connections form in his mind. By the time they reached a secluded clearing, the mist had thickened, and the air pulsed with energy. At the center stood a stone altar, ancient and covered in moss, its surface etched with symbols that glowed faintly in the dim light. The young woman turned to him. "This is where it begins," she said. "Here, you will confront the shadow that has bound your family for generations. Here, you will see that courage is more than facing danger. It is facing the truth of who you are." The rancher took a deep breath, the weight of fear pressing down, yet something stronger rising in its place. He had faced storms, hardships, and solitude, but this was different. This was personal. This was a reckoning. He stepped forward, his boots crunching on the stones. The symbols glowed brighter and the mist swirled around him, forming shapes that seemed alive. Faces appeared in the fog, ancestors, spirits, echoes of those who had lived and suffered. Their eyes were full of expectation, challenge, and hope. The young woman's voice was steady beside him. "Do not be afraid. You are not alone. The shadow is strong, but it is not stronger than your courage." The rancher felt a warmth spread through him, the fire she had ignited in him the night before now burning fiercely. He raised his hand, reaching toward the shadows, and for the first time he did not flinch. He spoke the words she had given him, words that had seemed strange and distant in the safety of his home. "I will not run. I will face you. I will rise above the darkness." The mist swirled violently, the voices rising in a chorus of challenge and warning. Yet the rancher stood firm, the young woman beside him, her presence a beacon of light and strength. The shadow that had haunted him for years began to stir, testing him, probing his resolve. But he did not waver. With each step forward, he felt the chains of fear loosen. With each breath, the weight of the past grew lighter, and with each word, the promise of change became real. As the mist began to part, revealing the altar in full, the young woman whispered, her eyes shining with certainty, "This is only the beginning. The curse can be broken, but it will demand more than courage. It will demand heart. Are you ready?" The rancher nodded, his gaze fixed on the altar, on the shadows, and on the path that lay before him. The storm within him had reached its peak, and now, at the heart of the canyon, he would take the first step toward redemption. And as he did, a sudden gust of wind swept through the clearing, carrying a faint whisper that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere. "The fate you fear is not yours to bear, but the choice must be made." The rancher's heart pounded in his chest, and he understood with an unshakable clarity that nothing would ever be the same. The night fell with a quiet ferocity over the ranch. The sky was a deep indigo, pierced by the silver light of a rising moon. Shadows stretched across the plains, long and twisting, like living threads weaving around the rancher and the land he had called home for so many years. The storm of yesterday had left the air heavy, still thick with the scent of wet earth, and the distant hills seemed to hum with a presence that was unseen but undeniable. The rancher rode through the fields, the black stallion moving with a measured, steady rhythm. The young Apache woman walked beside him, her steps silent, her eyes fixed on the horizon. She was calm, yet her presence carried an energy that tugged at the rancher's senses. He had followed her into the canyon, into the mist and shadows, because he trusted her words, and more than that, because he trusted her. The bond that had begun with her appearance during the storm had grown, silent yet powerful, woven through each glance, each unspoken understanding. "The shadows will test you tonight," she said, her voice low and steady, carrying over the soft rustle of the tall grass. "They will show you your fears, your regrets, your failures, but also your strength. Do not turn away from what they reveal." He nodded. He did not know what to expect, but he felt the truth of her words in his chest. There was no more hiding, no more pretending that life was simple. The darkness that had haunted him all his years was alive tonight, and he would meet it. They reached the edge of the canyon once again. The mist had returned, swirling around their feet, thickening like smoke over the stones. The air was cooler now, tinged with something ancient, almost magical. The symbols on the rocks glowed faintly, as if recognizing the rancher's presence, acknowledging that he had come to face what he had avoided for so long. The young woman turned to him, her eyes reflecting the pale moonlight. "Are you ready?" she asked. He swallowed hard and nodded. "I have no choice," he said quietly. "I can't run from this anymore." Her lips curved into a faint, approving smile. "Good, then let us begin." They moved forward deeper into the mist. The ground beneath their feet was uneven, worn by centuries of wind and rain. Shadows danced along the canyon walls, elongated and shifting, forming faces and shapes that were both familiar and strange. At first, the rancher thought they were illusions, tricks of the light. But as he stepped closer, he realized that the shadows carried whispers, soft voices, rising and falling, speaking words that only he could hear. "You are weak." He had carried guilt for so long, guilt for mistakes he could not undo, for losses he could never forget. The shadows now seemed to amplify those regrets, pressing them upon him like a weight he could not lift. He faltered, his grip on the reins tightening, but the young woman's hand on his arm steadied him. "Do not listen to them," she said firmly. "They are echoes of fear, not truth. The truth is yours to claim." He took a deep breath, letting the words sink in. Slowly, he felt the tension in his shoulders ease, just a little, as if her presence was an anchor in a sea of uncertainty. He followed her through the mist, moving toward the heart of the canyon where the ancient altar waited. The altar was larger than he remembered, a monolith of stone, weathered by time and covered in intricate carvings. Symbols glowed softly, as if alive, casting pale light on the surrounding mist. The rancher approached it cautiously, every step a challenge, every breath a battle against the fear rising in his chest. "This is where it must be faced," the young woman said. "Everything you have denied, everything you have hidden, it will appear here and you must confront it." He nodded, staring at the altar. A shiver ran down his spine, though he could not tell if it was from fear or anticipation. Then slowly, the shadows began to coalesce, forming shapes that were more distinct than before. Figures emerged from the mist, tall, imposing silhouettes, their faces obscured but their presence unmistakable. The rancher's heart pounded in his chest. He recognized them, his father, his mother, ancestors he had only heard of in stories. They stepped closer, their movements deliberate, almost like they were testing him. Their eyes were fixed on him, not with anger but with expectation. "You carry our burden," one voice said, low and resonant. "But you also carry the chance for redemption. Do you have the courage to claim it?" The rancher's throat tightened. He had lived his life believing that strength was measured by endurance, by isolation. But now, confronted by the living echoes of his family's past, he realized that courage meant more than that. It meant facing the shadows, embracing the truths, and daring to change. I will face it," he said, his voice trembling but firm. "I will not run." The shadows shifted, growing darker, swirling around him like smoke. They whispered doubts, regrets, and fears, yet he stood firm. The young woman's hand remained on his arm, her presence steady, guiding him through the storm of shadows. "You are stronger than you know," she said. "The darkness cannot hold you if you do not let it." Slowly, the shadows began to retreat, though their voices lingered, softer now, like distant echoes. The rancher felt a strange warmth spreading through him, a sensation of release, as though the weight he had carried for so long was finally easing. But the night was not yet over. A new figure emerged from the mist, taller and darker than the others, radiating power and authority. Its eyes glowed like embers in the night, and its presence made the air heavy with tension. The rancher recognized it instantly. It was the shadow of the ancestor who had caused the curse, a figure whose influence had haunted his family for generations. "You think you can face me?" the shadow intoned, its voice like rolling thunder. "You are not ready. You are weak. You are nothing without the fear you cling to." The rancher squared his shoulders, feeling the strength of the young woman beside him. "I am ready," he said, voice firm. "I will not let fear control me anymore." The shadow laughed, a sound that echoed through the canyon like the cracking of ice. "We shall see," it said, stepping closer, the ground trembling beneath its presence. The young woman raised her hand and a soft light emanated from her palm, casting a protective glow around them. "You are not alone," she said. "Together you will overcome this. Trust yourself. Trust what you have learned." The rancher drew a deep breath, feeling the warmth of her words, the fire of courage that had been ignited within him. He stepped forward, facing the shadow, and for the first time he did not flinch. "You do not control me," he said, voice steady. "I choose my path. I choose courage. I choose light." For a moment, silence fell. The shadow froze as if struck by the force of his words. Then slowly it began to dissipate, fading into the mist like smoke carried away by the wind. The oppressive weight lifted, and the canyon seemed to breathe, releasing centuries of tension in a single, quiet sigh. The rancher's legs trembled, but he stood tall, the young woman beside him, her eyes shining with pride. "You have taken the first step," she said. "The shadow will test you again, but you have begun to awaken. The curse has weakened, and your path is open." He exhaled, a mixture of relief and wonder filling him. He had faced the darkness, confronted the fears that had haunted his family for generations, and survived. And yet, even as he felt the first light of triumph, he knew that the journey was not over. There were more challenges ahead, more shadows to confront, more courage to summon. The young woman turned to him, her expression serious yet gentle. "This night has shown you what you are capable of," she said. "But do not forget, strength is not only in facing fear. It is in allowing yourself to feel, to connect, and to trust. You have begun, but the journey continues." The rancher nodded, understanding the truth in her words. For the first time, he realized that courage was not just about facing danger. It was about embracing life, embracing connection, and daring to change. The moon rose higher, casting silver light across the canyon. Shadows still lingered at the edges, but they were weaker now, powerless against the fire that burned in his heart. The young woman's presence was steady beside him, a reminder that he was not alone, that guidance and trust could overcome even the darkest fears. As they began the journey back to the ranch, the mist slowly lifting around them, the rancher felt a strange sense of anticipation. The night had tested him, revealed the strength he had forgotten, and awakened a fire he could not ignore. And yet, as the first hints of dawn touched the horizon, a whisper echoed across the plains, soft and chilling. "The greatest shadow is yet to come." The rancher's heart quickened, and he glanced at the young woman, whose gaze was steady and knowing. They both understood. The night of reckoning was not yet finished. The shadows had retreated, but the true test of courage, heart, and destiny was still ahead. He gripped the reins tighter, feeling the pulse of life, challenge, and possibility in the air. The path ahead was uncertain, yet for the first time in his life he felt ready. The night had awakened something within him, a power that could not be denied, and he knew that the journey toward redemption, connection, and transformation had truly begun. The first light of dawn crept slowly over the plains, brushing the tall grasses with gold. The wind was soft now, carrying the faint scent of rain from the night before. The rancher stood at the edge of his land, staring toward the distant hills, the place where he had faced the shadows and begun to awaken the courage that had long lain buried in his heart. He had returned from the canyon the night before, changed in ways that he could barely comprehend. The shadows that had haunted him for so long were no longer fully in control. They still lingered at the edges of his thoughts, whispering doubts and fears, but he had learned to face them, to confront them, and to walk through them rather than run. The young Apache woman had been his guide, her presence steady and unwavering, and her words had sparked the transformation that now pulsed through him like fire. The rancher mounted his horse and rode slowly across the fields, each step deliberate, each breath filled with purpose. The young woman walked beside him, her eyes bright with the calm certainty of one who knows the paths of fate yet does not dictate them. She had saved him in ways more profound than he could express, but she had also reminded him that salvation could only be claimed by courage, by heart, and by choice. As they rode toward the edge of the hills, the wind shifted again, carrying with it a faint whisper. It was different from the voices of the shadows he had faced. It was softer, gentler, but no less commanding. He felt it deep in his chest, as though the land itself were speaking to him, acknowledging the change that had begun. "This is the final step," the young woman said quietly, her voice carrying over the soft rustle of grass. "The shadow you face now is not the one from the past, it is the one within you. To break the curse completely, you must confront it fully, without fear, without doubt, without hesitation." The rancher nodded, feeling the weight of responsibility settle on his shoulders. He had faced his family's past, he had faced the shadows of fear and regret, and he had survived. Yet the final test was not about survival, it was about transformation. It was about becoming more than he had ever been, about embracing the power of courage, compassion, and connection. They reached a clearing atop a hill, the horizon stretching endlessly in every direction. The sky was painted with hues of orange and pink, and the light of the rising sun seemed almost magical, bathing the land in warmth and promise. At the center of the clearing stood a stone circle, ancient and weathered, etched with symbols that glowed faintly, resonating with a power that was both terrifying and beautiful. "This is where it ends," the young woman said, her gaze steady. "Here you will face the shadow one last time, and when you do, you will either claim your freedom or remain bound." The rancher dismounted, feeling the soft earth beneath his boots. The shadows were already forming, swirling around the circle like mist caught in sunlight. Shapes emerged slowly, taking the form of figures he had known, ancestors, guides, warnings, and at their center stood the most imposing shadow of all, the figure that had caused the curse, the presence that had haunted his family for generations. Its eyes glowed like embers, and the air around it was heavy with power. "You believe you are ready," the shadow said, voice like thunder rolling across the plains. "But you are nothing without the fear that binds you. You cannot escape your fate." The rancher felt a tremor in his chest but held his ground. He thought of the young woman beside him, of her words, her courage, and her unwavering belief in him. He thought of the land he loved, of the life he wanted to live, of the freedom he had longed for without knowing it. And he understood with perfect clarity that fear had no power over him unless he allowed it to. "I am not bound by fear," he said, voice steady, echoing across the clearing. "I choose my path. I choose courage. I choose light." The shadow advanced, and the ground beneath them trembled. The rancher did not flinch. He closed his eyes for a moment, centering himself, feeling the energy of the land, the strength of the young woman beside him, and the fire of his own heart. When he opened his eyes, the shadow seemed to pause, as if sensing the shift within him. "You have begun to awaken," the young woman said softly, placing her hand on his arm. "But now you must claim it fully. Face the truth of who you are and embrace it." The rancher took a deep breath. Memories of his past rose within him, trials, mistakes, moments of doubt, but he did not turn away. He welcomed them, acknowledging each one, understanding that they were part of the man he had become. He stepped forward into the circle and spoke aloud. "I am not my past. I am not my fear. I am the strength I choose to be, the courage I claim, the heart I embrace. The shadows may try to bind me, but I am free." A wind swept through the clearing, strong and warm, carrying with it the energy of the land, the power of the past, and the promise of the future. The shadow recoiled, its form wavering as though the light within the rancher was dissolving its darkness. The mist around the circle lifted, revealing the stone carvings glowing brighter than ever, resonating with a harmony that was both ancient and alive. The young woman's eyes shone with pride and certainty. "You have done it," she said. "The curse has weakened. The shadows will no longer control you. You have claimed your destiny, and in doing so, you have transformed yourself." The rancher exhaled deeply, feeling a lightness he had never known. The weight that had pressed upon his heart for decades was gone, replaced by clarity, strength, and a sense of purpose. He looked at the young woman, her presence radiant in the morning light, and he felt a surge of gratitude that words could scarcely express. "Thank you," he said quietly. "I could not have done this without you." She smiled, a gentle, knowing smile. "You did it yourself. I only reminded you of what was already within you. Courage, heart, and truth, they were always yours to claim." For a moment they stood together in silence, the plains stretching endlessly around them, the wind whispering through the grasses, carrying away the last traces of shadow. Then the young woman spoke again, her voice soft but full of meaning. "Your path is open now. The land is yours to protect, your heart is yours to guide, and your destiny is yours to shape. But remember this, true courage is never finished. It grows with each choice, each challenge, each connection you make." The rancher nodded, feeling the truth of her words resonate within him. He understood now that the journey of courage, heart, and transformation was not over. It would continue for the rest of his life. But he was no longer afraid. He had faced the shadows, embraced his power, and claimed the freedom that had eluded him for so long. As the sun rose higher, casting golden light across the plains, the young woman stepped closer, placing a hand lightly on his shoulder. "We were always meant to awaken each other," she said, "and now you are awake, truly awake." The rancher looked into her eyes, seeing not only the strength that had guided him, but also the reflection of his own courage and heart. For the first time he felt complete, not because the shadows were gone, but because he had embraced them, understood them, and claimed his own power. The wind carried their words across the plains, gentle and full of promise. The rancher felt the pulse of life, of love, of connection, and of destiny flowing through him. He knew that he had been changed forever, not by magic or by chance, but by courage, heart, and choice. The young woman smiled, turning to face the horizon. The rancher mounted his horse beside her, feeling a sense of unity and purpose. Together, they looked out across the land, the morning sun illuminating the beauty and possibility of the plains. The shadows of the past had not disappeared entirely. They lingered in memory in the land and in the stories of the rancher's ancestors. But now, they no longer controlled him. He had claimed his courage, embraced his destiny, and discovered the power of heart and connection. As they began the ride back to the ranch, the plains stretched before them, alive with light, life, and possibility. The young woman walked beside him, a guide, a friend, and a mirror of the courage and transformation that now defined him. And somewhere in the whisper of the wind, carried across the golden fields, came a faint but certain truth. The shadows may rise, but the heart that embraces courage and love will always prevail. The rancher felt it deep in his chest, a warmth spreading through him, filling every corner of his being. He knew with unshakable certainty that he was no longer a man bound by fear or by shadow. He was awake, alive, and ready to shape the destiny that lay before him. The plain stretched endlessly, the sun rising higher, and for the first time the rancher felt free, not just in body but in heart, in spirit, and in soul. And as the young Apache woman's presence remained beside him, steady and radiant, he understood that the journey of courage, transformation, and love had only just begun.